99% of you are not subscribed to the channel. At 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories. Subscribe now.
The galaxy of Azira was a tapestry of stars, each cluster of lights representing countless worlds, civilizations, and mysteries. At the heart of this cosmic expanse lay Viridiana, a planet known for its unmatched beauty and the mystical energy that pulsed through its every inch. From the verdant forests that blanketed the surface to the towering crystal spires of the capital city, every corner of Viridiana was a testament to the harmony between nature and technology. The Viridians, a race of beings with silvery skin that shimmered like liquid metal, had thrived here for millennia under the benevolent rule of the royal family. At the center of this legacy was Princess Alara, the last heir to the Viridian throne. Alara was a beacon of hope for her people, embodying the strength, wisdom, and grace that had long defined the Viridian monarchy. Her presence alone could calm the fiercest storms, and her voice, melodic and serene, was said to carry the power of the ancient energy cores that lay deep within the planet's core. These cores were the lifeblood of Viridiana, providing not just power but also sustaining the delicate balance of life on the planet. But peace had never been a permanent state in the galaxy. In recent months, dark clouds had gathered over Viridiana. Whispers of war echoed through the halls of the Crystal Palace, and even the twin suns seemed dimmer, as if mourning the fate that awaited the planet. The Gorith Empire, a race of ruthless conquerors driven by an insatiable hunger for power, had set their sights on Viridiana. The Gorith were known across the galaxy for their advanced technology and unyielding brutality. They expanded their empire through sheer force, assimilating or annihilating any civilization that stood in their way. For years, Viridiana had been protected by its natural defenses and the strength of its people. But the Gorith had developed a weapon capable of bypassing these defenses, a siphon that could drain the energy cores directly from the planet's crust. Without the cores, Viridiana would be reduced to a barren wasteland, its people left to wither and die. The Viridians fought valiantly, but the Gorith's assault was relentless. Day by day, the enemy pushed closer to the capital, and the royal army, though courageous, was no match for the Gorith's advanced war machines. The fall of Viridiana seemed inevitable, and in a desperate attempt to save their princess, Alara's advisors pleaded with her to flee. But Alara was determined to stand by her people, to fight until the very end. She could not bear the thought of abandoning the planet she loved so dearly, the place where her ancestors had lived and died, where the spirits of her family still lingered, watching over her. It was on the night of the final assault that Alara's resolve would be tested. The Gorith's fleet descended upon the capital with the fury of 1,000 storms. The skies were ablaze with the fire of battle as the Viridian forces made their last stand. In the midst of the chaos, the palace, once a symbol of strength and unity, was transformed into a battlefield. The crystal spires that had stood for centuries crumbled under the weight of the Gorith's assault. Inside the palace, Alara prepared for the worst. Dressed in her royal armor, a blend of shimmering metal and flowing silks, she made her way to the throne room, where she intended to make her final stand. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. She had never felt so alone, yet she knew that her duty was to her people. She would not let the Gorith take her alive, not while there was still breath in her body. But fate had other plans. As the palace walls shook with the impact of the Gorith's weapons, a squadron of enemy soldiers breached the throne room. They were monstrous beings towering over the Viridians, their faces obscured by dark, menacing helmets. Alara fought with all her might, her energy blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. But there were too many of them, and even her formidable skills were no match for the overwhelming numbers. In the heat of battle, Alara was struck from behind, her vision blurring as pain shot through her body. She fell to the ground, the cold crystal floor pressing against her cheek. As darkness closed in around her, she could hear the Gorith commander barking orders, feel the rough hands of the soldiers as they bound her wrists. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the shattered remnants of her throne, a stark reminder of all that had been lost. When Alara awoke, she found herself in a cold, sterile cell aboard the Gorith flagship. The walls were smooth and featureless, the only light coming from a small window high above her head. Through it, she could see the vastness of space, the stars distant and cold. The reality of her situation settled in. She was a prisoner, a trophy for the Gorith's victory. Days passed, though it was impossible to tell how many. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly in the silence of her cell. Alara's thoughts were consumed by the fate of her people. Were they still fighting? Had any of them escaped the Gorith's wrath? Or was she the last of her kind, destined to witness the extinction of her race from the confines of this prison? Yet despite the despair that threatened to overwhelm her, a spark of hope remained. Alara was not one to give up easily. She had heard stories, legends of beings from distant worlds who possessed extraordinary abilities. Among these tales was one that intrigued her, a story of a planet called Earth, where creatures known as lichens existed. These beings, neither fully human nor fully beast, were said to have the strength of 10 men and the loyalty of 1,000. It was a fanciful tale, one that had been told to her as a child, but now in her darkest hour, she clung to it. Perhaps somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy a savior awaited. Someone who could help her reclaim her world. Someone who could fight the Gorith as no Viridian could. Alara closed her eyes and sent out a silent plea, hoping against hope that the universe would answer her call. Unbeknownst to her, the wheels of fate were already turning, and far away, on a little blue planet, a young man with a secret of his own was about to receive the most unexpected visitor. Ethan Reynolds lived a life that could only be described as ordinary, perhaps even mundane. The small town of Pine Hollow, nestled deep in the forests of Oregon, was the kind of place where time seemed to move a little slower. It was a town where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest news was often about who had bought a new truck or whose dog had gone missing. For Ethan, Pine Hollow was both a sanctuary and a prison. At 24 years old, Ethan was a mechanic by trade, spending his days fixing up old cars in the garage his father had once owned. The smell of oil and grease was as familiar to him as the scent of pine trees that surrounded the town. His hands were always stained with the remnants of his work, and his clothes perpetually carried the earthy scent of the workshop. Life was predictable, and for the most part Ethan was content. But there was a part of him that yearned for something more, something beyond the borders of his quiet, isolated world. Ethan's secret set him apart from everyone else in Pine Hollow, a secret he had guarded fiercely since childhood. He was not entirely human. The Reynolds family carried within them the blood of the lichens, an ancient race that could transform into powerful wolf-like creatures. This ability had been passed down through generations, a gift, or curse depending on one's perspective, that was both a source of pride and a cause for caution. For most of his life, Ethan had struggled to control his transformations. They were tied to his emotions, and when he was younger, any surge of anger, fear, or excitement could trigger the change. As a child, he had learned to keep his emotions in check, to bury them deep inside where they couldn't cause trouble. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. His parents had always warned him of the dangers of being discovered, of what people might do if they found out what he really was. The lichens had once been a proud and noble race, but centuries of persecution had driven them to the brink of extinction. Now only a handful of them remained, living in secret, hidden away from the world. Ethan's parents had been two of those few, and they had done their best to prepare him for the life he would lead. They taught him how to control his transformations, how to harness the power of the beast within, and most importantly, how to survive. But despite their efforts, Ethan had never fully embraced his heritage. He had seen what the transformations did to his father, a man once strong and vibrant, reduced to a shadow of himself after years of battling the beast within. Ethan had vowed not to let that happen to him. He would live his life as a human, as normal as possible, even if it meant denying a part of who he was. And so, Ethan kept to himself, avoiding close relationships and never letting anyone get too close. He was friendly enough, but distant, always keeping people at arm's length. The few who knew him well enough to call him a friend often remarked on how calm and collected he was, how nothing seemed to faze him. They had no idea how much effort it took to maintain that facade, how much he had to hold back. Then, one fateful night, everything changed. It was late, and Ethan was alone in the garage, working on an old pickup truck that had seen better days. The radio played softly in the background, filling the quiet space with the comforting sounds of classic rock. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain. Ethan was just about to call it a night when he heard a noise, a soft rustling, like the sound of leaves brushing against the side of the building. Ethan paused, his senses suddenly on high alert. For most people it would have been nothing, just the wind or an animal passing by. But Ethan's heightened senses told him otherwise. There was something out there, something that didn't belong. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the garage door, peering out into the darkness. The night was thick with shadows, the only light coming from the dim bulbs inside the garage. For a moment he saw nothing, just the familiar outline of the trees and the dirt road that led into town. But then out of the corner of his eye he caught a glimpse of movement. A figure stepped out of the shadows, cloaked in darkness. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he took in the sight. The figure was tall and imposing, dressed in a long flowing robe that seemed to merge with the night itself. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but Ethan could feel the weight of his gaze, sharp and piercing. Before Ethan could react, the figure spoke, his voice low and resonant, carrying an air of authority that made the hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stand on end. "Ethan Reynolds," the figure said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I've come a long way to find you." Ethan took a cautious step back, his instincts screaming at him to prepare for a fight. But there was something in the stranger's tone, something that kept him rooted in place. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. The figure lowered his hood, revealing a face that was both alien and familiar. His features were sharp and angular, his skin a deep shade of indigo. His eyes, a brilliant shade of gold, glowed faintly in the dim light. He was not human, that much was clear, but there was a nobility in his bearing, a sense of purpose that resonated with Ethan on a level he couldn't quite explain. "My name is Cairo," the stranger replied. "I am a messenger from the galaxy of Zira. I come bearing a request, a plea for help." Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. "A plea for help? From me? You must have the wrong person." Cairo shook his head. "There is no mistake, Ethan. You are the one I've been searching for, the last of the Lycans, the only one who can save my world." Ethan stared at Cairo, trying to process what he was hearing. It sounded impossible, absurd even. He was just a mechanic, a man who had spent his whole life trying to hide what he was. How could he possibly save an entire world? "I think you've got the wrong guy," Ethan said, shaking his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm not even sure I'm what you think I am." Cairo took a step forward, his gaze intense. "You are exactly what I think you are, Ethan. The Lycans were once the protectors of the galaxy, warriors of unparalleled strength and loyalty. You carry that legacy within you, whether you accept it or not, and right now there is a princess who is in desperate need of your help." A princess. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, stirring something deep within him. The stories of old, the tales his parents had told him about the galaxy and the role the Lycans had once played, came rushing back. He had dismissed them as myths, stories to keep a frightened child entertained. But now, standing before this alien messenger, those myths seemed all too real. "Tell me what's going on," Ethan finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cairo nodded, his expression grim. "The planet Viridiana is under siege by the Gorath Empire, a ruthless force that seeks to drain the planet's energy cores and enslave its people. Princess Alara, the last of the Viridian royal line, has been captured and taken aboard the Gorath flagship. Her people are on the brink of extinction, and without her they have no hope of survival." Ethan's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of what Cairo was saying. A princess, a planet in peril, an empire on the march. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not something that could actually be happening. And yet, here was Cairo standing in front of him, as real as the tools in Ethan's workshop. "I don't understand," Ethan said. "What can I do? I've never even left Earth, let alone fought in a war." "You have the power of the Lycan within you," Cairo replied, his voice unwavering. "A power that can turn the tide of battle, that can save lives. The Gorath are strong, but they are not invincible. With your help, we can free the princess and give her people a chance to fight back." Ethan wanted to refuse, to tell Cairo that he was asking the impossible. But deep down, something in him stirred, a sense of duty, of responsibility. The part of him that had always longed for something more, for a purpose, felt an undeniable pull toward this mission. He had spent his entire life hiding from who he was, but now, faced with the chance to make a difference, to save lives, he couldn't turn away. "What do I need to do?" Ethan asked, the resolve in his voice surprising even himself. Cairo allowed a small smile to cross his lips, a glimmer of hope shining in his golden eyes. "Prepare yourself, Ethan. We leave tonight." Ethan's heart raced as Cairo extended a hand toward him. For a moment he hesitated, wondering if he was truly ready for what lay ahead. But then he reached out and grasped Cairo's hand, feeling a surge of energy pass between them. As they stood there, the world around them began to shift and blur, the familiar surroundings of the garage fading away. Ethan felt a strange sensation in his gut, like the world was being pulled out from under him. And then with a flash of light they were gone, leaving behind the quiet town of Pine Hollow and the life Ethan had known. In that moment, as they hurtled through the void between worlds, Ethan knew that nothing would ever be the same. He was about to embark on a journey that would take him farther than he had ever imagined, to a place where he would finally have to embrace the power within him. And somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, a princess awaited her savior, unaware that help was on its way from the most unlikely of heroes. The Gorith flagship, known as the Sovereign's Wrath, was a vast, menacing structure that floated ominously in the black void of space. Its hull was a jagged obsidian black, adorned with red, pulsing lines of energy that throbbed like veins in a living creature. The ship was a fortress, designed not only to transport the Gorith's war machines, but also to strike fear into the hearts of any who dared oppose them. Within its cold steel walls, Princess Alara languished, a prisoner in a place where hope seemed to have no place. For Ethan Reynolds, the journey aboard Cairo's small, nimble spacecraft had been disorienting, like diving headfirst into a storm he couldn't see the end of. He had barely come to terms with leaving Earth when the small vessel dropped out of hyperspace, the massive bulk of the Sovereign's Wrath looming ahead. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he peered out the viewport, the reality of what he was about to do hitting him with full force. The interior of Cairo's ship was sleek and minimalistic, its control panels glowing with unfamiliar symbols and alien script. Ethan had never seen anything like it, and he marveled at how effortlessly Cairo navigated the complex systems. As they approached the Gorith flagship, Cairo remained calm, his golden eyes focused on the task at hand. "Remember," Cairo said, his voice steady and reassuring, "we have the element of surprise on our side. The Gorith won't be expecting an incursion this deep within their territory." Ethan nodded, though his stomach churned with nerves. His hands, once so steady when working on engines and machines, now felt like they belonged to someone else. He was a mechanic from a small town, a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict, and yet here he was about to launch a rescue mission on an alien warship. Cairo must have sensed his apprehension, for he turned to Ethan with a look of understanding. "I know this is far from anything you've ever done," he said. "But remember who you are, Ethan. The blood of the Lycans runs through your veins. You are stronger than you think and the princess needs you. We all do." Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to take a deep breath. He had agreed to this, had chosen to step into the unknown. There was no turning back now. "I'm ready," he said, though a part of him still questioned the truth of those words. Cairo nodded and guided the ship toward the docking bay of the Sovereign's Wrath. The bay was heavily guarded, but Cairo's ship was cloaked, slipping through the Gorith's defenses unnoticed. As they neared the docking clamps, Cairo activated the ship's stealth systems, rendering it invisible to the flagship's sensors. "We'll enter through the maintenance shafts," Cairo explained as he brought the ship to a stop. "They're less guarded, and they'll lead us directly to the detention block where the princess is being held." Ethan nodded, his mind racing as he tried to memorize the plan. It was simple enough, but the stakes couldn't be higher. They had one shot to get this right, and any mistake could mean capture, or worse. Once the ship was secured, Cairo handed Ethan a small circular device. "This is a translator," he said. "It will help you understand the Gorith language and any other communication systems we encounter." Ethan clipped the device to his ear, feeling a slight tingle as it activated. The sensation was odd, like a soft whisper in his mind, but it quickly faded, leaving him with the impression that he could now comprehend languages he had never heard before. Cairo led the way as they exited the ship, moving with a fluid grace that Ethan could only envy. The maintenance shaft was narrow and dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal. It reminded Ethan of the garages back home, though the stakes here were infinitely higher. The walls hummed with the power of the ship's systems, and Ethan could feel the vibrations under his fingertips as they moved along the corridors. They made their way through the labyrinth of tunnels, avoiding patrols and security cameras with a precision that spoke to Cairo's experience. The Gorith were nothing if not thorough, but Cairo seemed to know every inch of the ship, guiding Ethan with silent hand signals and the occasional whispered command. After what felt like hours, they reached the entrance to the detention block. The door was heavily reinforced, guarded by two massive Gorith soldiers clad in dark, heavy armor. Their eyes, a sickly yellow, scanned the area with a predatory intensity, their hands resting on the hilts of vicious-looking energy weapons. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. These were not foes he could simply outsmart or avoid. If they were going to get to Alara, they would have to fight. "Cairo," Ethan whispered. "How do we get past them?" Cairo's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "We'll need to take them out quietly. If they raise the alarm, we'll have the entire ship on us in seconds." Ethan nodded, his muscles tensing as he prepared himself. He could feel the lichen inside him, the beast that had always lurked beneath the surface, stirring in response to the danger. His senses sharpened, his vision clearer, his hearing more acute. For the first time, he didn't fight the transformation. Instead, he welcomed it, letting the power flow through him. Cairo moved first, a blur of motion as he approached the guards from the shadows. With lightning-fast precision, he struck one of the soldiers with a paralyzing blow to the neck, his movements almost too quick for Ethan to follow. The soldier crumpled to the ground without a sound, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. The second guard turned, raising his weapon to fire, but Ethan was already moving. He lunged forward, his body shifting mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming as he transformed into his lichen form. He felt his muscles swell, his senses exploding with new intensity as he became the wolf-like creature he had always feared. The guard's eyes widened in shock as Ethan bore down on him, his massive form dwarfing the armored soldier. Before the Gorith could react, Ethan struck, his claws raking across the guard's chest with a force that sent him crashing into the wall. The guard slumped to the ground, unconscious, and Ethan stood over him, panting, his heart racing with the thrill of the fight. Cairo gave Ethan a brief nod of approval before turning his attention to the door. "Well done," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now let's get the princess." Ethan reverted to his human form, though he could still feel the lichen's presence just beneath the surface, ready to be unleashed again. He followed Cairo to the control panel beside the door, watching as the alien quickly bypassed the security protocols. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor lined with cells. The air was thick with a sense of despair, the silence broken only by the occasional soft whimper or the rustling of chains. Ethan's heart ached at the sight, but he forced himself to focus. They were here for Alara, and they couldn't afford any distractions. They moved down the corridor, checking each cell as they went. Most were empty, but a few contained prisoners, Viridians, their silver skin dull and lifeless, their eyes hollow with defeat. Ethan felt a surge of anger at the sight, but Cairo's hand on his shoulder kept him moving. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor, where a single cell stood apart from the rest. The door was larger, more heavily reinforced, and guarded by a complex security system. Cairo's hands flew over the control panel, his expression tense as he worked to unlock the door. "Hold on, Alara," Cairo muttered under his breath. "We're almost there." With a final decisive tap, the door unlocked and slid open, revealing the cell's interior. Ethan stepped inside, his breath catching in his throat as he saw her. Princess Alara was sitting in the center of the cell, her hands bound by energy restraints that glowed with a faint blue light. Her once vibrant silver skin was pale, her eyes dull and filled with exhaustion. But even in her weakened state, there was a regal grace about her, a quiet strength that shone through the darkness. Ethan felt a pang of guilt as he looked at her, this woman who had suffered so much while he had lived a life of relative peace. But there was no time for self-recrimination. He had come to save her, and that was exactly what he would do. "Princess Alara," Cairo said softly, stepping forward. "We're here to rescue you." Alara looked up, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of Cairo and Ethan. For a moment, she seemed unable to believe what she was seeing. But then recognition flickered in her eyes, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Cairo," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You came." Cairo knelt beside her, carefully disabling the energy restraints on her wrists. "Of course I came," he said gently. "I would never leave you behind." Ethan watched as Cairo helped Alara to her feet, supporting her as she struggled to stand. She was weak, but there was a determination in her gaze that told Ethan she wasn't ready to give up just yet. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said, his voice firm. "The ship will be on high alert soon. Can you walk?" Alara nodded, though it was clear she was still struggling to regain her strength. "I can manage," she said, her voice stronger now. "But we must hurry. The Gorith won't let us escape easily." Together, they made their way back through the detention block, Ethan and Cairo supporting Alara as they moved quickly and quietly. The alarms had not yet been triggered, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time. They needed to reach the ship before the Gorith realized what had happened. As they approached the maintenance shaft, Ethan heard the distant sound of footsteps, heavy metallic footsteps that echoed ominously through the corridors. The Gorith were coming. Cairo, we need to move faster, Ethan urged, his heart pounding with urgency. Cairo nodded, his expression grim. I know, we're almost there. But as they reached the shaft, the sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer. Ethan's pulse quickened as he glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of the approaching soldiers. 3 of them, clad in the same dark armor as the guards they had taken down earlier. They were moving fast, their weapons drawn and ready. Go! Ethan shouted, pushing Alara and Cairo ahead. I'll hold them off. Cairo hesitated, but Alara grabbed his arm, her voice firm. We can't stay here. Ethan is right. We need to get to the ship. With a reluctant nod, Cairo helped Alara into the maintenance shaft, leaving Ethan to face the Gorith soldiers alone. Ethan didn't hesitate. He let the lichen take over, his body transforming in an instant. He could feel the power coursing through him, the primal strength of the beast within. The Gorith soldiers rounded the corner just as Ethan finished his transformation, their yellow eyes widening in shock at the sight of the massive wolf-like creature blocking their path. With a feral growl, Ethan lunged at the nearest soldier, his claws slicing through armor and flesh with terrifying ease. The soldier let out a choked cry before collapsing to the ground, his weapon clattering away. The other 2 soldiers fired their weapons, but Ethan was faster, dodging the energy blasts with supernatural agility. He leaped at the second soldier, knocking the weapon from his hands before delivering a powerful blow that sent him crashing into the wall. The final soldier attempted to retreat, but Ethan was on him in an instant, his claws ripping through the armor with brutal efficiency. The fight was over in seconds, the Gorith soldiers lying unconscious at Ethan's feet. He took a moment to catch his breath, his chest heaving with the effort. The beast inside him roared with satisfaction, but Ethan pushed it down, forcing himself to regain control. He shifted back into his human form, wiping the sweat from his brow as he hurried to the maintenance shaft. Alara and Cairo were waiting for him, their expressions a mix of relief and awe. You did it, Cairo said, his voice filled with admiration. You really are the last of the lichens. Ethan nodded, though he still wasn't sure what that truly meant. Let's get out of here before more of them show up. They moved quickly through the shaft, retracing their steps back to Cairo's ship. The journey felt longer this time, every second weighed down by the knowledge that the Gorith could be closing in on them. But finally, they reached the docking bay, and the sight of the small, sleek spacecraft filled Ethan with a surge of hope. Cairo activated the ship's systems as they climbed aboard, the engines humming to life with a low, powerful thrum. Ethan helped Alara into one of the seats, securing the restraints as Cairo prepared for takeoff. The docking clamps released and the ship lifted off the ground, gliding smoothly out of the bay. As they soared into the blackness of space, the Sovereign's wrath shrinking behind them, Ethan allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. They had done it. They had rescued the princess. But as the stars streaked past them, Ethan knew that their journey was far from over. Viridiana was still in danger, and the Gorith would not give up their prize so easily. They had bought themselves some time, but the real battle was still ahead. For now, though, they had a chance, and with Princess Alara by their side, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, they could save her world. As he settled into his seat, the weight of the mission ahead pressing down on him, Ethan glanced at Alara. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the weight lifted, replaced by something else, something unspoken but powerful. In that moment, Ethan realized that he was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a lichen, a protector, and he had found his purpose. The road ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready to face it. With Alara by his side, he was ready to face anything. Viridiana lay on the brink of annihilation. The once lush forests, with their towering crystal trees that shimmered in the sunlight, were now scorched and lifeless. The elegant spires of the capital city, which had stood for millennia as a testament to the harmony between nature and technology, were reduced to crumbling ruins. The Gorith Empire had left its mark on the planet, a scar that ran deep into the hearts of the surviving Viridians. As Cairo's ship streaked through the atmosphere, Ethan, Alara, and Cairo could see the devastation below. The sight filled them with a mix of sorrow and determination. They had returned to a world teetering on the edge of destruction, and the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily upon them. Ethan glanced at Alara, who sat beside him in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the broken landscape below. Despite the weariness etched into her features, there was a fire in her gaze, a resolve that burned brighter than the devastation around them. She had lost so much, yet here she was, ready to fight for what remained. "We can still save them," Alara said, her voice steady but tinged with grief. As long as there is life left on Viridiana, there is hope. Cairo nodded, his hands expertly guiding the ship toward a hidden base nestled deep within the mountains. The resistance has been holding out in the northern territories, he said. They've managed to evade the Gorth's main forces, but they're running out of time. We need to act quickly. Ethan tightened his grip on the armrests of his seat, feeling the familiar tension coil in his muscles. The lichen within him stirred, eager for the fight to come. But it wasn't just the beast that hungered for action. Ethan himself felt a deep, burning need to protect Alara and her people. This planet, once so alien to him, had become something more. It was a place where he could make a difference, where his power could be used for good. As the ship descended into the mountain range, Ethan could see the entrance to the resistance base, a narrow crevice hidden among the rocks. Cairo deftly maneuvered the ship into the opening, and they landed smoothly within the underground hangar. The moment the engines powered down, Ethan unbuckled his restraints and stood, ready for whatever lay ahead. The hangar was bustling with activity as the resistance fighters, a ragtag group of Viridians and other alien species, prepared for the final battle. They looked up in surprise as the ship's hatch opened, and Princess Alara stepped out, followed by Cairo and Ethan. Murmurs of disbelief and hope rippled through the crowd as they recognized their princess, alive and free. Princess Alara, a Viridian officer, his silver skin marred by scars and his uniform tattered, rushed forward, dropping to one knee before her. We feared you were lost." Alara reached out and gently lifted the officer to his feet. "I was lost," she said, her voice firm yet kind, "but thanks to these two I've been found. And now we must rally together. We still have a chance to reclaim our world." The officer nodded, his eyes filled with renewed determination. "We'll follow you, Your Highness, whatever it takes." Alara turned to Ethan and Cairo, her gaze filled with gratitude. "We need a plan," she said. "The Gorth's forces are vast, but if we can strike at their heart, we might be able to turn the tide." Cairo stepped forward, a holographic map of the planet appearing in the air before them. "The Gorth's main base of operations is here," he said, pointing to a location near the planet's southern pole. "They've set up a command center around the largest energy core, draining it to power their fleet. If we can destroy that core, we'll cripple their operations and force them to retreat." Ethan studied the map, his mind racing as he considered the possibilities. "But how do we get past their defenses? They'll be expecting an attack, especially now that they know Alara is free." Cairo's expression grew grim. "There's a network of old mining tunnels beneath the command center. They're unstable and dangerous, but they could provide us with a way in, if we can navigate them without being detected." Alara nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. "We'll need to split our forces. A small team will infiltrate the tunnels and reach the core while the rest of our fighters create a diversion, drawing the Gorth's attention away from the real threat." Ethan met Alara's gaze, understanding what she was asking of him. "I'll go with you," he said, his voice steady. "We'll need someone to deal with whatever defenses they have down there, and I can handle that." Alara smiled, a brief but genuine expression that warmed Ethan's heart. "I knew I could count on you," she said softly. The plan was set into motion with swift precision. The resistance fighters armed themselves, gathering what few resources they had left. Ethan, Cairo, and Alara prepared for the infiltration, donning tactical gear that Cairo had salvaged from the wreckage of previous battles. As they suited up, the weight of what they were about to do settled over them like a shroud. In the quiet moments before they set out, Ethan found himself standing alone at the edge of the hangar, staring out into the darkness of the cave. The reality of the mission loomed large in his mind. There was a good chance they wouldn't make it back, but there was no room for doubt now. He had made his choice, and he would see it through. Alara approached him, her presence a comforting warmth in the cold, damp air. "You've already done so much," she said, her voice soft. "You don't have to do this, Ethan. I won't ask you to risk your life for my people." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. "It's not just for your people, Alara," he said. "It's for you, and it's for something bigger than any of us. I've spent my whole life hiding from who I am, but not anymore. If I'm going to die, I want it to be for something that matters." Alara reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You're not going to die, Ethan. We're going to get through this together." Ethan squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her words. "Then let's make sure we do." The time had come. Cairo led the way as they departed the hangar, slipping into the night like shadows. The resistance fighters followed, their spirits bolstered by the presence of their princess and the promise of a better future. They moved quickly through the mountains, avoiding Gorith patrols as they made their way toward the entrance to the old mining tunnels. The entrance was hidden behind a cascade of rocks, the opening narrow and barely visible. Cairo cleared the way, and one by one they slipped into the darkness below. The air inside the tunnel was thick with dust and the scent of earth, the walls lined with ancient machinery long since abandoned. The only light came from the small handheld devices they carried, casting eerie shadows as they moved deeper into the ground. The journey through the tunnels was treacherous. The ground was uneven and the walls seemed to close in around them the farther they went. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken fear that something could go wrong at any moment. But Alara led the way with unwavering determination, her presence a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. As they neared the command center, the tunnels grew narrower and more unstable. The sound of the Gorith's machinery above them became louder, a constant reminder of the danger they were walking into. Cairo stopped them at a junction, consulting the holographic map once more. "We're close," he whispered. "The core should be just ahead. Once we reach it, we'll need to plant the charges and get out quickly. The explosion will trigger a chain reaction that should take out the entire command center." Ethan nodded, checking the explosives they had brought with them. "Let's do this." They continued on, their steps careful and deliberate. The tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he saw the energy core. It was massive, a pulsating mass of blue energy that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The core was housed in a complex network of machinery, cables, and conduits snaking out from it like the roots of a tree. But they were not alone. The Gorith had stationed guards around the core, their dark armor gleaming in the light. Ethan counted at least a dozen of them, heavily armed and alert. Alara glanced at Ethan, her eyes questioning. He nodded, signaling that he was ready. They would have to take out the guards quickly and silently if they were going to plant the charges without alerting the entire base. Ethan let the lichen take over, his body shifting into the powerful beast that had become his greatest weapon. Cairo and Alara prepared their weapons, moving into position. With a final nod, they launched their attack. Ethan moved like a shadow, his claws slicing through the air with lethal precision. The first guard went down without a sound, his body crumpling to the ground. Cairo took out the second guard with a well-placed shot to the head, while Alara disabled the security systems that monitored the core. The guards reacted quickly, but they were no match for the trio. Ethan's lichen form tore through their ranks with terrifying speed, his senses heightened and his reflexes sharp. Cairo's shots were deadly accurate, each one finding its mark. Alara moved with grace and efficiency, her every action driven by a single purpose, to save her people. Within minutes, the guards were down and the chamber was silent once more. Ethan shifted back into his human form, his breath heavy but controlled. They had done it. They had cleared the way. "Plant the charges," Cairo instructed, moving quickly to set the explosives around the core. Ethan and Alara followed suit, placing the devices at strategic points. The energy core pulsed ominously, as if aware of the danger it was in. As they finished planting the charges, Ethan felt a rumble beneath his feet. The ground shook, and the sound of distant explosions reached his ears. The resistance fighters were making their move, drawing the Gorith's attention away from the command center. But it also meant that they were running out of time. "Let's get out of here," Ethan shouted, his voice barely audible over the rising noise. They turned and sprinted back the way they had come, the tunnel shaking as the chain reaction began. The walls cracked and crumbled around them, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. Ethan could hear the roar of the explosion building behind them, a force of nature that threatened to consume everything in its path. But they kept running, driven by sheer determination. The exit was just ahead, a pinprick of light in the darkness. They burst through it, diving to the ground as the tunnel behind them collapsed in a deafening roar. Ethan lay on the ground, panting, his body trembling with exhaustion. But as he looked up, he saw the sky above, clear and bright. The twin suns shining down on them. They had made it. They had survived. Cairo helped Alara to her feet, and Ethan stood beside them, staring out at the horizon. In the distance, they could see the Gorith command center, smoke and fire billowing into the sky as the explosion tore through it. The energy core had been destroyed, and with it, the Gorith's hold on Viridiana. The battle was not over. There were still pockets of resistance, and the Gorith would not retreat easily. But the tide had turned, and for the first time, victory seemed within reach. Ethan looked at Alara, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes shining with hope. She had lost so much, but she had gained something too, something that could never be taken away. "Thank you, Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "You could have, Alara. You're stronger than you know, but I'm glad I could help." Alara stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. "Viridiana is my home, and I will do whatever it takes to protect it. But you've become more than just a protector, Ethan. You've become part of this world, part of my world." Ethan felt his heart swell with emotion, the connection between them deepening in that moment. He had found his place, his purpose, and it was here, beside Alara, fighting for something greater than himself. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. "This is where I belong." Alara smiled, a warmth spreading through her that made her feel as if, despite everything, there was still hope. They stood together, looking out at the dawn of a new day, a day filled with promise and the possibility of a future worth fighting for. Viridiana had been scarred, but it would heal. The Gorith would be driven back, and the Viridians would rebuild. And as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. Under the light of the twin suns, Ethan and Alara faced the future with a newfound strength and a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. This was their new beginning, their new dawn.